Any? Oh, thanks. No one has? Anything from administration, Mr. Thackeray?
Yes, if I may, I'd like to ask the Manager of Legislative Services to introduce a new member of our team.
Good evening, Council. I'm happy to introduce to you Miss Lisa Brown. Lisa is joining us as our new Legislative Services Assistant, and I am super happy she's here.
Welcome to the staff. At this time, we're on item 3, delegations, and 3.1 is fire and flower. Sorry, I need to confirm the agenda as presented. Thank you.
I move to confirm the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Corbeil. All in favor? And that motion is carried. On to delegations. We have 3.1, fire and flower, if you wouldn't mind coming to the microphone area in the middle. And just before you present, I'm sure you've been told already, but you have a 10-minute time to present, and then there may be some questions and discussion afterward.
Wonderful.
Thank you, and welcome tonight.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for having us. Is this the microphone that's on? Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, thanks for having us. I'm Tanis Danchuk. I originally am from a small town myself. My dad was the mayor, so I in a little tiny town in northern Alberta, so I spent a lot of time in municipal offices. So I'm very, very happy and proud to be here with you folks today. So Bree and I are here just to talk about Fire and Flower and the shop that's going to be opening here in the near future. We're very excited to be here speaking with all of you today about the new cannabis shop that we're opening. At Fire and Flower, we see value in community relationships. And Strathmore is a beautiful town, and we look forward to doing business in this vibrant community. Our management team, Bree and Shannon, have extensive ties with many of you here, and we take that relationship to heart. Customers are our livelihood, but education and inclusion are the core of our shop values. Our goal is to make everyone feel welcome when they come through our doors. Fire and Flower is an education-based retailer. We are absolutely, the main drive for us is to educate consumers and actually to educate the world on safe and responsible cannabis use and retailing. At Fire and Flower, we have hired curious, emotionally intelligent leaders to ensure that professional and pleasurable experience is enjoyed by everyone who enters into our shop. All of our general managers and our assistant general managers have gone through an extensive training. So they have now endured 90 hours of a training program that we put together ourselves. As the corporate trainer, I started in July helping to construct that program. And we've now put through, I think, 52 managers throughout the province. So it's been almost like going back to university for myself. I'm an HR advisor from the University of Calgary by trade for 10 years. So this is quite a different shift for me, but I did see a lot of value in working in corporate responsibility for something that is going to happen in our society anyway, and I think that there's a lot of professionals that can be served well by doing it right. What else would I like to tell you folks? We created a model for the stores that we call the Wisdom Model. So this model serves as a way for our managers and our canistas. So the canistas are the employees that work in the store. So instead of a barista, like at Starbucks, we're called canistas for cannabis. And to assist everyone who enters our shop, whether they are brand new to the use of cannabis or they are a refined consumer. Our first role is always as educators, number one. We may have customers and community members who enter into our shops only with questions and curiosity on their minds. That is what we are here for, to have candid, open, and honest conversations. We're not just here to sell cannabis, we are here to educate everybody. As the cannabis industry continues to evolve, so will our teams. We will continue to learn by keeping current on new products, laws, the changes, and new methods of consumption, as well as the news that affects those in this community. Our goal is to normalize cannabis use and debunk the myths surrounding the cannabis plant, armed with science-based facts. We, however, ensure not to ever give medical advice, as the Canadian medical cannabis market is much different. We are not healthcare practitioners, and we do not take on that role, nor do we ever give any medical advice to any customers that come in with questions about medical ailments or anything of that sort. We always refer them to their family doctor. Our company philosophy is based on honesty, empathy, respect, and the sharing of feedback for us to grow as students of ourselves every day. So, I mean, I've learned so much since July when I started with this company. I can tell you that I do feel that I have become a student of myself. At my age, I didn't think I could learn anything else, and I've learned a lot. We focus on making sure we become vibrant and contributing members to the communities that we work and live in. We want to be good neighbors and make connections so that everyone is willing to work together. Our partnership with the AGLC has been extremely robust and communicative from the very beginning of our journey towards becoming Canada's cannabis shop. We've always conferred with them on all regulations and federal laws as outlined in the Cannabis Act to be a leader in responsible cannabis retailing. Within this process, we understand the importance of promoting safe, responsible use with the slogan, "Start low and go slow." That is absolutely the motto of all of our shops, is to start low and go slow. We have implemented a 2 ID check system. So every single person that enters the shop is ID'd, and every person who purchases is ID'd. So there's a 2 ID system. This is not AGLC mandated. This is something that we as a company have decided to implement to add an extra layer of security. We've hired the best of the best in the industry in all areas, including security and safety protocols. This has been our top priority from the very beginning. As we enter into this new era of recreational cannabis, we always get asked so many questions. So we thought it might be a great idea to answer some of those that we field on a daily basis. So, Bree and I are going to answer some of the questions that we get every single day. And there's a lot more, but we just kind of took the ones that we felt were kind of important. Yeah. So Bree, do you all know Bree? Does everyone here know Bree? This is Bree, she's our shop manager, and Shannon, the assistant shop manager. And Calvin here is actually the manager from, well, I don't know your address, but McLeod Trail South. And he'll be working in a building that is mostly medical offices. So we are actually doing a talk, I think, next week to all of the physicians in that building. I'll be speaking with all the physicians because they'd like to learn a little bit more about cannabis. So he's come along as well. So Bree, what cannabis products will be available at a Fire and Flower shop on October 17th?
So October 17th, we will have oil, capsules, flour, and we will carry seeds as well.
And we will also have packages of pre-rolled, the slang is joints, so ones and threes and fives, okay? Where do we get our cannabis from?
So we do get it from LPs, actually sell to the AGLC, and then we get it from there. So everything is regulated through the AGLC.
So the AGLC is, they're not specific to their licensed producers. They are agnostic. So they draw from a bunch of different licensed producers. They house it all at the AGLC warehouse, and then we order from them, and they drop it off once per week, and under very, very strict security measures. Everything's locked in a safe room, and with massive face recognition security. We have Brinks, Tyco. We've got some really great security measures in place. How much cannabis can I possess on my person in public?
So it is 30 grams, and we're going to make very, very 100% sure that that is exactly what it is. Nobody leaves the shop with more than 30 grams.
Yeah.
And that will be...
And that's a combination of all forms.
Yeah.
So if they did buy the dry flower or the oil, the way our POS system is set up is it actually flags us and will shut down at 30 grams. So while people can possess more in their home, in public they cannot. So as responsible retailers, we can't sell more than that to them at that time.
And I think I was just going to add as well, for instance, if there was anybody that possibly seemed possibly under the influence or something like that, it's our responsibility to also make sure that they have a safe ride home, that we have offered any sort of transportation for them too. So that's part of where we have to learn body language. We have to know people the minute that they enter into our shop and be very specific to that.
Part of our wisdom model of sales, that why we had 90 hours of training for all of our management, was to be able to ask those open-ended questions and to ensure that cannabis was being sold in a responsible manner, but to the right people. It was, there are a lot of risk factors, including, women that are pregnant, people with mental illness, people that have pacemakers. There's a lot of, there are quite a few things that, we don't advise using cannabis for, and even under the age of 25 is not actually, because of brain development, is not something that we suggest. While the law might say differently, we do like to stay within the parameters of those as suggestions. So what else, Bree? How long does it take to feel the effect
So,
of using cannabis?
yeah, so that can be anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. And that is if it has been smoked, consumed. And then depending on oils as well.
1 to 3.
It could be 1 to 3 hours. So that's pending person and pending consumption method as well.
Yeah. And it's unique to everybody. Everyone has a different body. Everyone's minds work differently. The two active components in cannabis are THC and CBD, which many of you've heard of. THC is the psychoactive component, which does work more with the mind, and CBD is more for the body, and that's more you'll hear about medicinal effects. So, for example, my mother has fibromyalgia. She uses CBD prescribed by a doctor to her. So there's no mind changing in there. What steps are being taken to work with authorities in regards to impaired driving? That's a question we get a lot.
Yeah. We will have pamphlets in our store, so we have those readily available to hand out to each and every customer, just to make sure that they do know the specific law guidelines as well. And that's our responsibility, to make sure that each and every person does receive.
Yeah. Not only those, we've got Health Canada on board, Government of Canada, the local detachments, police departments. Our advisory council is made up of some wonderful, ex-RCMP members. We have done due diligence to make sure that we are doing everything right. What happens to the medical cannabis industry?
Nothing, actually. It's still the same, and that's a big question. We get that a lot. It's a hard transition for a lot of people to understand that medicinal is kind of gearing towards recreational, so it stays the same. There is no change.
Yeah. So they'll still have to go to their doctor if they have a medical prescription for cannabis for pain. If they would like to just use recreational cannabis for the effect, then they can come to a shop. But for the most part, if they have any medical concerns, they need to still follow up with their doctor and still receive their medical cannabis through the same methods they did before. It is I get this question too a lot. It is the same product though. Like cannabis is cannabis. There's 113 different strains of it, but cannabinoids in the product, but it is the same. Just how we get it is different. And where can I consume, which is also a big question.
Yeah, definitely. So number one, we need to make sure that we let everybody know that each municipality is different, each city is different, every province is different. So our recommendation, if anybody does ask, is that they really need to look into where they're going. If they're traveling, what they're going to be doing. That's a responsibility that, we may know some guidelines, but because things are changing all the time, best practice is to make sure that they research into.
Know before you go.
That's right.
There's a lot of campgrounds that are allowing it. The entire city of Edmonton is allowing public consumption as long as you're not in a park or by certain boundaries of schools. But Calgary is absolutely not. It's only in your own personal home. So each municipality has got their own laws. So it's very important for people to know that. Is there, I think that's it for the kind of the questions that we thought might come out of this. Is there any other questions that we can field while we're up here?
Councillors, Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a few questions. So the first one would be, who owns Fire and Flower?
So, Trevor.
Well, Trevor Fencott is our CEO, and it's private investors, essentially. Well, that's a good question. I just know who our CEO is. Who owns it? I guess it would be stockholders and investors. Like as far as the money, how we started, it was an investors group.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's privately held though?
It is privately held.
Okay.
We are going public though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's an article that was just out, I think 4 or 5 days ago. So we'll be public. They're hoping December, January.
Okay. And as far as the 2 ID rule, is that going to be this, are they asking for the same ID twice, or is it 2 different IDs?
No, it has to be government regulated ID, and all of the managers have been extensively trained on how to identify what ID is valid.
Right, but I'm saying, like, do I show you my driver's license when I walk in the door, and then I can show you that driver's license again when I buy, or do I have to
Yes.
show you a different piece of ID?
Yes, because at the door we have a greeter that is stationed there at all times. In the bigger shops, the reason that we did it was because in some cases, if a shop gets very, very busy, a liquor store is different in that sometimes people will take their children in, but when you get to the till, you get ID, right? Whereas with cannabis, you cannot have children in the store at all. So what if the person that's at the front, one of our canistas, is turned for a moment and someone does walk in? We don't want there ever to be a slip up. So therefore, the door and the buy, because we just don't want any chance of there being a slip up. So you can show the same ID. Yeah, government, and we have at the podium where the greeting podium, we actually have examples of valid ID. We have examples of non-valid ID, and I think in training there was 2 whole days we spent just on ID, on recognizing ID, and all of the workers and the managers are qualified cannabis workers, so they're all QCW. So they've had to go through extensive background checks. They've had to go through police checks. They've had to do the Sell Safe Cannabis course, as well as apply for a qualified cannabis worker with the Alberta government. So all of those together also was a huge component. A huge component of it was how to ID. Like it's really, really driven home. So.
Okay. And I guess, do you want to tell me what your idea of the right balance is for public consumption?
The right balance?
Yeah, I guess like where in between, say, Calgary's and totally open use, do you think the right balance would be?
That's a really personal question because that would be something that how I would personally feel. I don't want to represent the company because we would adhere to whatever the municipality in any place what they would choose.
Okay, that's a good answer. And so you guys are going to be open on the 17th, is that right?
We're not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't believe, right now, we will have there's 17 shops in Alberta that now the AGLC has given the go-ahead to, and they've ordered product for. 3 of the 17 in Alberta are Fire and Flowers. The 3 that we have opening on the 17th are Nemeo, Fort Saskatchewan, and St. Albert.
Okay. And so as far as like when AGLC wholesales to you guys, do they vary the pricing on things like, say, flour? Is that varied, or is it just one price for flour?
It's varied by THC content.
Okay. And what effect do you think this will have on the black market, and especially given that the black market right now is kind of pricing less than what AGLC sells it for?
We could talk about that all day. Again, I can't speak on behalf of the company, so that would again be a personal question that I would answer. So.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But I'm sure we can take that offline after.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I had just one question. When I went to a conference on cannabis, it talked about how this generation of users will probably drift more away from inhaling to capsules. And my question is, do you think that'll happen, that more consumption will be that?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, we are really looking forward to our forward-facing goals are towards edibles. Okay. That is the market. It is absolutely in, I would say, most retailers' minds, it will be edibles.
Okay.
In 2019.
So as far as public consumption, that'd be a hard one to track if...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that the biggest issue with public consumption is the smell. Mm-hmm. I think
And yeah, and I think now, especially now, it's a matter of being very discreet. And I think it's personal to people. So they don't want to necessarily be using a vape in public. So being able to use capsules with.
Okay, and my last one was, you mentioned the time it takes, and you talked about oils. Is that the capsules? When you discuss oils, that's the capsule someone would
Ingestion
purchase?
takes longer just because it has to go through the stomach before it gets into the bloodstream, whereas with inhalation, it goes right into the brain.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Your Worship. Quick question, I might have missed it. Is a lot of your education, do you guys have pamphlets and stuff like that there, or is it all just communicated?
We have a great, actually, we just got a new marketing pamphlet that will be out, and it's amazing because I think it's about an 8-page fold, and it's something like, it's like THC, CBD, it's like Cannabis 101.
It's everything.
It's everything you need in facts, and you walk in, and it's just like there for you. We also will have a virtual wall. It's like a kind of a big computer. You walk up and you screen, and you can pull up the strains and see what's in them. This much THC, CBD. So there are some options in the shops to kind of explore and self-serve, but we also have experts on staff to work with you. We have a lot of the shops will have, we call them education tables. So there's books there. There's all types of spaces to sit and maybe be discreet. Sometimes people don't want to be right out and open speaking, so we'll have little areas in the shops where those conversations can be had. We'll have pamphlets from like I said, like Mothers Against Impaired Driving. There's lots of different community groups that we'll be working with, and as we build with the community, we'll see what you guys want in our shops as well. So I think that's important.
Thank you, Councillor Corbeil. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you very much for coming tonight to present, and
you
we
so
wish you
much.
the best in the future. What's the size of your staff here in the Strathmore location?
So we will have 10 staff. Currently, we do have 9 staff.
Okay,
And that's not including myself and my AGM.
okay, thank you. Well, we wish you well.
Thank
Good
you
luck
so
with
much.
everything.
Thank you guys so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
your time.
Don't feel you have to stay for the rest of the meeting. We always warn our public, run if you get the chance. Item 4, confirmation of minutes, 4.1 minutes of the September 12th, 2018 Committee of the Whole meeting. Thank you, Councillor Corbeil.
I move that council adopt the minutes of the September 12th, 2018 Committee of the Whole meeting as presented.
Thank you. You've heard the motion. All in favor? And that motion is carried. Item 5, I don't believe we have any unfinished business. We do have unfinished business? We don't have unfinished business. Okay, thank you, Jen. Oh, yes, sorry. We need a motion to go into Committee of the Whole. She is amazing.
Councillor Montgomery?
Councillor Montgomery, would you like to make a motion?
No, I don't.
Oh, Councillor Corbeil.
I move we go into Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And we're now in Committee of the Whole. Items from administration, 6.1 beekeeping in Strathmore on page 11.
Hello, everybody.
Good evening, Chuck.
I tried to make this a presentation for all 5 senses tonight. My dad heard I was doing this presentation and he brought honey samples. So I'm going to pass these out. Yes, you get to keep them.
Dragons did.
Just take one and pass it on. And then just to get an idea about what we're talking about for hardware, I've got some little things that go in the bee box. 10 of these things go in one bee box. Yeah, so just to get an idea of what's going in some of this stuff. So my dad and I are beekeepers. We're 6 kilometers outside of town. Yeah. So please take one on. There should be enough for administration as well, too. We've been joking about the samples thing for a while with the marijuana guys, and this is one of our times where we can bring samples. So I've got a very brief overview for beekeeping tonight. I think my mission and administration's mission is to kind of get guidance from council today, have a kind of a preliminary bee meeting to investigate some direction that council wants to go. Have a very frank discussion, committee of the whole. Staff, I'm kind of a novice guy when it comes to this. You might stump me with questions tonight, but there's no reason why I can't become an expert. There's lots of resources out there. So the recommendation for tonight is just council's discussion. That's my sister on the right, there with the picture. Yeah, my daddy's a retired teacher and now a movie extra and a beekeeper. Yeah, just outside of town, near Eagle Lake there. Yeah. So many communities, including Chestermere, Calgary, are supporting urban beekeeping. Chestermere is a bee city. You can see on the map there that there is kind of a tourism thing going on with this bee city. There's a focus with pollinator plants and bee-friendly development. Chestermere was one of the first ones in Alberta to do this. There's Calgary Bee Club and other interest groups in the region that are active. Alberta is the largest producer of honey by quite a long shot in Canada. Staff have been approached a couple times in the past couple of years from folks wanting to start this up, and we thought it was about time to have a discussion with council. There's many directions that we can go. There's a ton of resources out there. I know a lot of guest speakers that would be happy to come speak to us if that's what we wanted. Chestermere has been very friendly. Calgary's been very friendly. My dad goes to the Bee Club meetings as well with lots of connections there. So the Calgary guidelines have been attached as information to this report. Calgary doesn't have an actual bee bylaw. They have bee guidelines which recommend the number of hives, hive placement. They recommend membership in the Calgary Bee Club. They recommend liability insurance, and they're a contact for further information and advice. That's all the guideline does. It's been attached in that report. Calgary, Denise? Yeah.
Calgary does say that you have to follow provincial guidelines, though.
Absolutely, 100% correct, Councillor Peterson. City of Calgary bylaw officers do respond to complaints, but they defer all regulations to the provincial Bee Act and subsequent bee regulation.
Do you know if following up on Councillor Peterson's question or comment, do you know if there's if there were reasons that Calgary decided not to go with the bylaw approach?
It's a good question, Mayor Fuel. I have a hunch that their legal team is onto something, if they don't want to be ultra vires and kind of just have the province have rules that overstep them anyway, but I'm not 100% sure on that. If council wishes, I can look into those reasons and bring those back. It is a very good question why they've chosen not to do bylaw and just done the guidelines. It might also be for simplicity's sake, like they have just a lot on the go and they say, we're just going to have some simple guidelines for folks to follow. We recommend liability insurance and come to the meetings and you have to register with the province, follow those guys' rules, all that kind of thing. Could be a number of things for City of Calgary. I can come back with that, though, if you'd like. So the Calgary bylaw officers do respond to complaints. So these are staff, City of Calgary municipal staff. The three main causes for complaints, folks don't like their neighbors. They're trying to get their neighbors in trouble. That's the number one cause of bee complaints. Number two, they're not watering their bees enough. They don't have enough water nearby for their bees. So bees go to pools, hot tubs, other areas close to humans. That's the second most frequent reason for the complaint. And then the third one is too many hives. People have too many of the bee boxes on their property. The guidelines recommend 2 and they have 4 or 5 or whatever it is for some reason. So that's another issue. Okay, so there is a provincial Bee Act. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Councillor Montgomery.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is a hive just like, a certain size of a box, or is it like just one location of a box or something?
Thanks, Councillor. Great question. So a box would be 10 of these frames, so about this big with 10 of these things in them, that's one box. So City Calgary guidelines say 2 boxes for those would be the maximum for a 50 by 100 foot lot. And then if you have a bigger lot, you can go up to, I think, 4 boxes is the recommendation. But yeah, it's about this big and about this tall. And then there's different equipment for honey supers and all that kind of stuff, but about that big for 10 of them. There is a provincial Bee Act and a provincial bee regulation that go hand in hand. Beekeepers are required to register with the province. So you have to send these folks an email and let them know where your hives are, how many hives you have, and you have to do that by a certain date, I think, every year. Provincial inspector can enter properties, inspect hives. They have the right to do so. They've got a list of all the properties in Alberta. They can issue orders, they respond to complaints, and they are available for help and advice. So that's where the province comes in. And you can find the Bee Act and regulation just by going to Queen's Printer and looking that up. So tonight, it's for council's discussion. I think that this issue potentially involves a number of departments, including my department, Development Services, Communications, Community Protective Services, Enforcement. There's merit in asking for some sort of proof of qualifications from these folks who want to start hives. Proof that they're maybe members of the City of Calgary Bee Club. Proof maybe that they've had a certificate or some sort of class or lesson with beekeeping, something to show that, hey, they understand that this is a kind of a complex craft, a complex hobby or craft that they want to do. I forgot one slide. Risks was the slide that I forgot in the presentation. Beekeeping, the craft is not without risks. There's plenty of risks with this. It's a lot of work. A child can get stung down the block by a wasp, and the beekeeper, up the street would get blamed for the sting. There's that risk. People are allergic to bees. You could have a neighbor who has hive set up, and then the next door neighbor, a child gets stung and has to be taken to the hospital. Your bees can swarm if you don't properly maintain and inspect the hives. They outgrow the hives, and they can swarm. So that's a big kind of pile of bees that would go on a car or a storefront or whatever. It would need to be properly addressed by someone who has the qualifications to handle a swarm. There's that risk. If it gets too hot in the hive, yeah, if they lose their queen, they do that. If it gets too hot in the hive or too cold in the hive, they do that. And another risk is it's a lot of work. People can get into this craft and not realize that it's pretty much a part-time job from spring to fall. Like you can't go away. You need to have someone there, making sure that the water's topped off, making sure that everything's okay, the queen's still happy, the bee's entrance isn't blocked, that kind of thing. There's just so many. You got to be on call. And then once you tarp them for the winter, that's when you can kind of go on your vacation. But for a novice person just jumping into this, they might not realize that, hey, it's a lot of work, and therefore kind of neglect this, and then it becomes an issue. They swarm, they aren't unhappy, that kind of thing. So that's all the information that I have prepared. I just wanted to have a frank discussion more tonight with council to get a direction on where we see Strathmore going with urban bees. So thank you so much for the time tonight.
Thank you, Chuck. Councillor Sowell, and then
Thank you,
Councillor Peterson.
Thanks, Your Worship, and that's a great presentation, Chuck. Thank you.
Thanks.
It's very interesting. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to discuss, and I'm glad you brought in the risks involved, because I think one of the other risks is in regards to disease, but that's, I guess, my focus on this. I should first say that I'm in favor of this concept. I have nothing against this. I think it's a great hobby, and it's a good thing. And I like bees. It's the risks that do concern me, and specifically, I have two members of my family who are deathly at risk of bee bites. So there is a serious concern there. But I think a lot of this can be mitigated, and I think one of the ways that a lot of this can be mitigated, you've already discussed, and that is in regards to education, training, and knowledge of the beekeeper. There's probably a couple of other things, and one of the bylaws that I located, I was very impressed with, and that's the bylaw in St. Albert.
Okay.
Because it really does focus a lot on the risks and mitigating those risks, and that's what I liked about it. I after reading that bylaw, I'm under the impression that if somebody follows that and those controls, that there could be a happy situation arise in regards to a neighbor whatever they do with bees, putting them in there and keep them. Yeah. one of the only issues that I had with that, and they do have a section in their bylaw that deals with notification of neighbors. And I just haven't figured out, one of the questions that would arise in my mind anyway is, excuse me, that's fine and dandy when you're setting up, but then that neighbor moves and what would be the, what would be the mechanism required to ensure that the new owner was aware that your neighbor had bees? So I haven't quite figured out how that would work, and perhaps that's one day that would be a question that we'll have for administration. But I do like it. When I first heard that this was coming forth, my initial focus was going to be on keeping this in, and take some actual steps to allow beekeeping in rural area, and specifically on some of our property, perhaps south of the highway. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I'm certainly open to looking further into a residential beekeeping, as long as the risks are mitigated. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Councillor Sobel.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Worship. I have a lot of hope for this project in terms of the capacity to enhance environmental protective factors around bees, and everybody knows what they are. But one of the things that I think that we have a really, really good opportunity to set up a partnership with the county. And I'd like to see us do something initially to set up a 3-year plan where people with agrarian interests could actually have beekeepers on their property. And certainly for anybody that's farming, this is a boon to have bees on their property. Mm-hmm. And if we could set up a 3-year partnership with the county, and we could put some kind of parameter around it in terms of licensing and education and capacity, and we could set it up in such a way that if there were rural property owners who wanted to partner with people who were interested in beekeeping, and we set up a mentorship project within that 3-year period, so people who eventually wanted to do urban beekeeping could take a mentorship under somebody that did that, because it really speaks. And I agree with Councillor Sobel. I like the Edmonton City bylaw. I like the St. Albert one even more. But I think that we have some unique opportunities built in here that we could do that. And I'd love to see opportunities for Robert Proctor and Mark Jobson to come in and be able to do education, because you're right, beekeeping's a lot of work. Yep. I think in this area, there's a 30% winter kill, generally, 28% or something winter kill. And there's also great potential for damage if people don't know how to keep bees properly in terms of getting disease into the hives and spreading to others. It can be devastating. And so municipalities have an obligation to look into that and to make sure that they do due diligence. So that's where I am. I would really like to see it as a county partnership leading into an apprenticeship and gradually into urban beekeeping, so that that the people who really were passionate about it would have an opportunity to do it. And as Councillor Sobel said, I think that mitigating risk factor is critical. And I really thank you for this, and thank you to your family.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you, Your Worship. So like in a case like Calgary, Calgary bylaw enforces provincial rules, is that right?
Well, I don't, it's kind of unclear where that is. Like, I know, like, in regards to nuisance and, like, I think the city guys might be able to respond before the provincial guys. The city guys wouldn't have access to the provincial list of hives unless they kind of corresponded together. It's kind of unclear how it all works. I think they deal more with neighbor complaints, like that number one problem between the two we saw was the guys trying to get their neighbors in trouble, and the Calgary guy might be the first to the scene that says, hey, he does meet our guidelines. If you want to take this further, call the provincial guy. It's not something that I'm an expert on, though. Jason, we can look into kind of more Calgary's role, why they've chosen to go guidelines and not the bylaw route. I think that's come up again, and that's a very valid question, something worth looking into and bringing it back as part of whatever this next step may be, just to provide council that information, because it is kind of weird how they've chosen just to go guideline. and not an actual bylaw, but there's still staff involved in the process.
Yeah, like, I guess, my concern is just to do with, making sure that whatever costs we're laying out through enforcement and education and whatnot, and
Yeah.
administration, we're gonna be taking back through, licensing fees, or at least like, fines or something like that if somebody, contravenes the bylaws.
Yeah, exactly.
Councillor Peterson, did you want to follow up on
Well,
that?
I just know that I remember reading on the Calgary website that they said that they were following the provincial guidelines or the provincial rulings, and that where there were serious incidences relative to the keeping of the hive, that the Alberta Agriculture Apiary, whatever they're called,
Yeah.
that they would come in, and there's just been a recent issue where that happened. Peace River has a beekeeping, and they called the province in there, and they had a disease in their hives, and they literally quarantined and shut down the hives in Peace River. But if it's a neighbor complaint or a nuisance complaint,
Yes.
bylaw has jurisdiction under that anyway.
Absolutely.
But Calgary said as far as the beekeeping, the hive keeping, they wanted to keep that under the provincial regulation, and Alberta Agriculture, and they have people in Calgary that work for Alberta Agriculture that enforce that and do this supervisory work.
Okay, thanks for the info. One last thing, I guess, I neglected to take a jar of honey for Councillor Bowers, so if
Okay.
you wouldn't mind. I'll
Yeah,
take
no
Oh,
worries.
how nice of you.
Yeah, it is raw honey, so just young children probably off the bill there, and also pregnant women shouldn't have raw honey, just like you wouldn't have raw
not
eggs.
pasteurized.
Yeah, it's not pasteurized, so just keep that in mind. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the report, Chuck. I actually talked to Preston out of Chestermere.
He's an SHS graduate, Preston Pruteau.
Yeah.
He's a PhD student guy, or PhD guy working out at Chestermere now.
Yes.
He would be happy to come see us.
Very.
Yeah.
He actually said so.
Yeah.
I didn't know who to talk to. Thought I might as well talk to somebody who actually does it.
Yeah.
And I was talking to him about the risks, and his comment was like risks living within the natural world, but a sterile world devoid of bugs and plants is harder to prospect. He said it's all about education. There are actually quite a few people who are allergic to bees that are beekeepers. I do like Councillor Sobel's idea with mitigating the risks and everything else. I think it just will make people a little bit more responsible, but I'm very excited with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corbeil. If I can just respond, thanks for the comment. One of my missions tonight was, to figure out if you folks would like a guest speaker as well to come to one of the next committee of the wholes. You might have your C list or your B list, me, and then we can bring in an A list kind of guy like Preston or, someone from the Calgary Bee Club to kind of give a,
Or we could go, Calgary has, just so you know, just in this line,
Yeah.
Calgary has what they call beer and bees.
Okay.
So, with their, what do you call those, breweries,
Oh.
yeah, because brewery needs beer.
Bees.
They need
Bees.
They do.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Proctor.
Thank you.
I am a little bit in between, no, probably more so with Councillor Peterson. My concern is based solely on all the hobby people. Like, get in there, get these hives in their backyards, and then don't have a clue what's involved. I don't know what you can do to mitigate that, but that is a big concern for mine. I mean, it's just like every other animal, every other pet. People get overwhelmed, don't know how to look after them, and then what do they do with them? Drive them out to your dad's house
Exactly.
and drop off all the bees.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my big concern about the bylaw. We need to make sure that there's something in there that really covers what we're going to do when all these bees are abandoned.
I agree, Councillor Cox. Thank you so much. I mentioned that one point of asking for some sort of proof of qualification or proof of attendance to a Calgary Bee Club that these folks have gone to, maybe potentially to start kind of a communication network. So if hey, they do get in over their head or they lose interest in this hobby, they would have someone to reach out to. That could be something to look into as well. They've at least got an email of the guy running the bee club, and they can reach out to that kind of network and say, hey, I'm no longer interested in the hives. us asking for a proof of that attendance to the meeting might be worth something discussing. Yeah, thank you.
Calgary has a mentorship group.
Okay.
That's why I was thinking, if we had a mentorship group and you went through the mentorship process, then you would serve.
Councillor Sobel?
I would just comment that if you have a look at the St. Albert bylaw, it deals with that very well.
Okay.
It focuses exactly on the point you're trying to make.
I think that you sent that today.
No.
Yesterday?
I think,
Friday?
yeah, I think a few days ago.
Today's Wednesday. Thank you, councillors. I would have to echo some of the ones who've already spoken. I would love us to take a look at St. Albert's bylaw, just as far as putting some more framework around things and making sure that potential beekeepers could consult with their neighbors too, just to make sure, and that we have a way of making sure, registering them, knowing what's there, knowing where they are. But thank you very much for your presentation, Chuck.
Thank you.
Item 6.2, cannabis consumption bylaw. Is that you still, Chuck? No, Trent is coming up. Thank you, Mr. West. Thanks again, Chuck.
Thank you.
Yeah, where's our sample?
We're gonna need like a bylaw and like.
I'm definitely not keeping up with the previous presenter.
That's a good question. Chuck, just before we let you totally go, are you coming back with more information or?
Next steps, yeah.
Yeah, what's our go forward, or what do we?
I would only say that I don't think I'm in need of anyone else. There's tons and tons of information on there, and I think the concept is pretty simple.
So but we want administration to move forward on it.
Right.
So we should do something after we come out of this meeting. Or next meeting.
Basically, we should come back with us for the bylaw.
With a draft.
Have you got a group of people who are wanting to have beehives in town?
We've got a few, little nibbles of folks. I think
People who
Mark.
want them on the periphery.
Yeah, periphery for sure, but, maybe one or two residents over the last 2 years have approached us. They're not, they're not waiting on me to send them an email. I just said, come back.
I guess my question is, are we better being proactive, or are we then jumping the gun and getting a bylaw in?
Well, the good news is that I don't think the season starts until after Christmas, so
Yeah.
that's good. But we can bring a bylaw back to one of the next meetings.
Councillor Sobel?
I guess, and don't get me wrong, I love your idea, Councillor Peterson, in regards to having a partnership with the county, and I don't think we should stop that. But I believe we should go ahead with the bylaw for one particular reason. I know there are hives in town. I'm aware of people that are doing this right now, beekeeping, and if we.
And we're silent on it.
And silent, and I get that, but bringing in a bylaw, and so I would hope that administration will review some bylaws that exist in this province, including the St. Albert one, and then perhaps come back with another discussion.
Doesn't preclude anything. You're right.
Exactly.
I like it.
I don't think it would hurt to bring something in and then pursue the other end of things with partnership with the county.
So, Councillor Sobel, have you forwarded that St. Albert bylaw to Mr. Thackeray or to Chuck? Is that something
I
you,
just passed that to council, but I'm very happy to do it.
you can find it online? Councillor Thackeray, Mr. Thackeray.
Sorry?
Did I send it to you?
I don't
Can't remember. I don't think so.
recall,
I think I
no.
just sent it.
But yes, if, I was just gonna say, if councilors have any other areas they'd like us to look into, please pass it along. We're aware of some other best practices from some other cities across Canada. It's becoming a much more common thing to promote beekeeping. A friend of mine does it actually out in the island, and it's been very successful if it's done properly. And to your point, Chuck, it is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work,
And to
yeah.
promote, but, one of the only thing that we don't have, and, it isn't specifically addressed in St. Albert's, but it is in Calgary, but not in the bylaw, but just in their general groups of clubs. And that is promotion of businesses doing beekeeping, especially if they have rooftops.
Oh, yeah, restaurants are doing it now, and
Yes.
they're using their, as with kitchen gardens, beekeeping, so it's become very, very cool.
Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you. So I was just gonna ask, I guess, can we even prevent anyone from, or even control anyone having beehives right now without the bylaw?
Yes.
Yeah, just because there's nothing in place right now.
Yeah.
So we're in a situation where we should start to be proactive and get something in place regarding beekeeping. Yeah. Okay, so do you have clear enough direction as far as?
Absolutely. Would council like to hear from us, administration, next, or would you like me to schedule a guest speaker? Or are you happy with administration?
I'd like to hear from you.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
The cannabis consumption bylaw, Mr. West.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. It is my honor to present to Council tonight two bylaws for Council consideration. One is the smoking bylaw, and the other is the cannabis consumption bylaw. In my research, I tried to find something that appeared to be a standalone cannabis consumption type bylaw, and of course there are none. And when I spoke to any legal counsel, that's exactly what they're really busy doing for everyone. So a little bit of research on the variations that are taking place throughout the province, which doesn't help legal, because municipalities are all over the map, and it's based on their heart, their feel, or whatever that there is. And so I've indicated a couple. But as I indicated in my report, legal offices across the province are heavily involved in the development of municipal bylaws. And based on brief conversations, municipalities are looking at communities that are going to have complete bans. They're also looking at considering regulations similar to smoking. And then lastly, they're looking at bylaws that are more of a identifying local places where cannabis can be smoked freely. So public, much like Calgary was looking at in the Bridgeland areas, and then of course that went the other way, which of course is probably in the drafter's humble opinion where things are going to be. My very short second paragraph. While each bylaw may have their pros and cons, all will experience some form of legal process as the cannabis consumption landscape is figured out over the next couple of years. And I say that because at some point in time, we are going to need to get more regulation from AGLC or the Cannabis Act. Somewhere there are going to have to be control measures because there's going to be realizations that public acceptance or lack of acceptance is going to drive regulation, which of course comes from the province, because then it's an expectation of all of the municipalities as a minimum standard, and they keep setting those minimum standards. So municipal bylaws regarding cannabis consumption will have to look more like smoking bylaws right now, because that is the only thing that municipalities actually have. There is a provincial act around smoking, such as 18 or no smoking legally under the age of 18, a number of things. But municipalities also can pass bylaws to regulate, restrict, or designate smoking areas. And we can't do that with alcohol. The alcohol is a provincial regulation that is strictly followed. The drafter, myself, I've blended it as best I could in the cannabis consumption to reflect more of the alcohol consumption in public places, while also blending a little bit of the smoking. And it's, as I said, it's a really odd landscape, because there's nowhere where you can reach out and say, now this is a really good one. This is the one that's going to work for us. Because you can get really married to an idea, and in 2 years or 3 years after court has established precedents and case law, everybody will have to move to that landscape. So, and that will also include those, I believe, again, drafter's opinion only, those communities that are having outright bans, because that doesn't meet the spirit and intent of the federal legislation, which allows for public recreational use of cannabis. So everything's gonna kind of come to the middle and coalesce at some point in time over the next 3 to 5 years. And regulation will definitely find its place in whatever bylaw we consider, review, discuss today. While I was doing some of the brief research, fortunately, Werner had sent out a Parks and Pathways enhancement with regard to smoking. And I'm like, whoa, hang on, wait. You know, like, let's stop for a second and take a look. And it was he sent that out because it was the only piece of municipal bylaw that had any reference to smoking of anything at any time. And the initial draft was to enhance the definition of a park to include the parking lot, and also to talk about smoking in and around parks. So I confiscated that piece, I put it into my report, so I can't take credit for that piece. That is definitely Werner's all the way, and I appreciate the fact that he allowed me to do that, because then I could segue into why it was important that we considered an actual smoking bylaw for the municipality that got us back into line with the provincial acts, as well as actually giving us some ability to do some active education, active engineering, and at the end of the day, active enforcement. Okay, so with the smoking bylaw, now I have a base to reference cannabis and cannabis consumption. So it took a while to make that fit, but once I got it to fit, it worked. So the bylaw that you have before you, both the smoking as well as the cannabis bylaw, are direct borrows from Okotoks, who are doing some really good work, but also thanks to Jen and Ledge Services, because there was some formatting, some differences, and that how we put our bylaws together, that Jen addressed for me. So we don't believe that the changes that were initially recommended to change smoking and include the parking lots and those things are required. Those can be referenced or they can be removed at a later date. It doesn't matter. They won't be ultra-virus to the smoking bylaw should it be passed. They don't conflict, including the definitions. So I mentioned about gaps, gaps remaining. Should we just go with that, the amendment to the Parks and Pathways bylaw? And so the last thing that I really want to point out again is there are some sharp edges with any new, including the smoking bylaw, that I will point out as I briefly go through the actual bylaws themselves, that I feel it's really important that you weigh in and help administration understand how you feel about some of the things that are identified. And I will be specific, but lastly, the future to evolve will evolve with the court cases, and regulations must be addressed and allowed. So, and the final point that I made in here was with the sharp edges, smoking in vehicles, and we'll talk about that when I go through the bylaws quickly. So I'm starting on the actual smoking bylaw. Smoking in public places, referred to as the smoking bylaw, does not yet have a number because I definitely want I want to take you along for the journey, and I want your fingerprints on this document. We considered and looked at all aspects of the municipality, or so we thought until last night when Tracy came to the fire hall and said, "What about this?" And I went, "Okay, well, there's one." And I did try to not address workplace and to allow workplace to deal with their own occupational health and safety, and workplaces are compelled to work with the provincial act anyway. So there is one line in here that I acknowledge I missed in the removal, and that's F3, So that would be removed from the document that would come to council. We went through all of the outdoor public places, playgrounds, private residences, proprietors and proprietorships. So there, other than the one that was identified last night, we don't believe that there's any gaps that are left. So if there are, I'm hoping that tonight is the night that we can nail down the last one. Under S for public pathways, one of the things that we need to have a conversation about, and there may be other ways to address this without addressing it in the bylaw, but it may actually also, could be addressed in the bylaw, but it's property that's not owned by us, and that is the private land on either side of the canal that's utilized extensively in this community for walking and free recreational opportunities for residents, but it's not our land. So it's not designated, and there's nothing in this document that addresses that gap. And so I haven't had time to figure out how that would work. I know we've got lots of conversations with WID around the development south of the highway and other opportunities to have conversations with WID around water and water usage. And they do ask us to keep an eye on the canals and remove people from the waterways. And so we provide a service without an authority on behalf of them. So maybe there's a fellowship and a handshake that can be addressed simply to include the WID lands, the dry part of the WID lands that run through the community. So then we believe all of the land and everything is captured at that point.
Could I just ask a question? Would it not be considered a public pathway anyway, despite the ownership? If there's nothing restricting use, and it's open and available, would that not be considered a public pathway?
I would think that it would be, but because there's no, when we look at our land use maps, there's zero designation, and maybe Ryan can speak to this better than I can, but there's no designation for those lands. So they're not MRs, they're not reserves, they're nothing, and because public goes on there, or they don't restrict the public from using it, doesn't automatically make it a public space, just like walking along the railroad tracks. People can do that, but that's not a public space, that is.
Well, yeah, no, I don't know though. I don't know if I agree with you on that.
Please, yeah.
In regards to that, and Director Simpson was whispering my ear to his way to solve this. The town has a green space access agreement with the WID that allows the public to use these spaces as public space, and we maintain the paths and whatnot, but it is WID land. So we can work with Trent and his group to come up with a definition that would say, publicly owned spaces or spaces administered by the town for the purposes of public recreation or something. We can easily come up with a definition, I think, that doesn't tie it to zoning or anything, that instead ties it to how it's functionally being used and the town administering it. We'd of course make sure the WID was happy with that direction, but I don't see them objecting to us busting folks for smoking on their property.
Okay, I think Councillor Peterson's question is in regards to this point here.
It is, the one place that I see that may not be addressed in this community is the dog park. And so it is the property for our use, but I believe it belongs to the WID. And there's a pathway in it, but it's not exactly a pathway. And it is the place where, in my observation,
Mr. Thackeray?
people very commonly smoke. And in fact, people come there to smoke without dogs. And so I think that,
It's true.
it's true. And so I think that, we received a letter from the veterinarians about this concern. It's a big concern. And so the other thing I didn't see in the bylaw was with regards to discarding products inappropriately. And I don't know if it has a place, but, because of that venue and with what I've observed there, that could be problematic.
Yeah. I was gonna, yeah. So, so the act of smoking is one. The discarding of smoking material is, falls under the Environmental Protection Act. Yeah, so it can be addressed with a provincial ticket, or it can be addressed with a municipal ticket. Either way, yeah. So, but dog park is not specifically identified, but I think that based on, is WID land? Yeah, okay,
And when we need enforcement, that's probably gonna be where it is.
yeah.
Councillor Montgomery?
Currently, like, do you get a lot of smoking, aside from, like, former cab drivers, do you get a lot of smoking bylaw calls?
No, through the chair to Councillor Montgomery, no, because there's nothing to enforce. The only calls we would get right now are based on if someone was smoking in a park and they actually read the park and pathway bylaw, which is very obscure. I didn't know it was there until we started doing the research. So we get complaints and lots at the skate park, which I've supported the municipal enforcement staff in the awareness that is specifically identified, and we can enforce at the skate park smoking, because it's in 14.7, and in the parks and pathways, it specifically identifies the skate park. So we will be doing more of that there, but other than the skate park, I can't say that we get a lot of complaints.
Okay. And currently, I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to kind of, like, map this out myself, but let's say, like, according to like this, if somebody wants to smoke outside off of their property, where are they allowed to do it under these rules?
Off their property, there would be virtually no place other than in a designated smoking area that would be assigned. We would, as a municipality, we would need to be more diligent in our designated smoking areas outside of our public buildings, which would have to be more than 10 meters away from the entrances. And they can't be any more than 6 meters in diameter, the way that this is. So it causes it to be very prescriptive, as opposed to, the provincial regulation, which says you have to be 5 meters from a doorway of a public building. Well, no, this says now you have to have a designated spot, and you'll probably then have to put, as Councillor Peterson suggested, or maybe not suggested, but that's what I heard, so, some type of a device to control as best you can the disposal of the material and that kind of thing. I'm sorry, Councillor, did I answer your question, or did I?
Yeah.
Mr. Thackeray, did you want to weigh in?
Nope, you want to finish, and then I'd
Oh,
like to weigh in, please.
So I guess, like, I hate to always kind of argue this, but to try to compare cannabis to alcohol, I think it's kind of going down kind of a bad path, I guess, because, like, it's almost like not even in the same universe, almost, as far as like the effects that have. Somebody can drink until they're falling down, they're passed out, they're crawling on the ground and throwing up everywhere. And yeah, you're not supposed to do that. But no, and I guess, like, the converse of that would be, you could have one beer and be fine. And so, it's like, why are we kind of treating it as if it's, and I'm assuming that we have these rules because of the intoxication. Otherwise, we would just go with a smoking kind of extension, basically. And so I'm wondering, I guess when you were kind of crafting this, what did you have in mind as far as, like, the level of intoxication that you're trying to, I guess, mitigate for the town? Because, like I said, it's like, at least in my perspective and experience, it's just like, it's not even in the same kind of class at all. And I don't like that it's being, I guess, grouped that way because of that.
And that's an excellent and fair comment, Councillor, and I appreciate it, because that's what I need to be able to turn around and revisit this and get it back to you in a week's time. This primarily is about the smoking and not the cannabis. So So I can jump to the cannabis piece and talk to that in relation to your comments about alcohol. And alcohol consumption, of course, is highly regulated. It has to be in a licensed premises, or it has to be on your own property. No one is allowed to drink alcohol on any public property unless they have a permit. A license that's issued by AGLC for a special event, whether it's in a building, outside of a building, adjacent to a building, or a beer garden like we had Canada Day down at the park. So that prohibition is that of a provincial legislation. My thought while I was drafting was in the protection of the children and the complaints and concerns of people who are now just getting used to the smell from smoking cannabis, because that's all it is smoking cannabis. It's not edibles, it's not the oils, it's nothing else, because we would never be able to know when that was occurring.
We're counting vaping as smoking. as well,
Vaping
right?
is smoking
Okay.
also, yes. So, as you suggested, the only way that we would have an idea would be through a degree of intoxication that they're demonstrating physically. And then the choice now becomes, are they a nuisance, which, someone shuffles them off to a cab and they go home, or are they someone who is ready to injure themselves or others, which then becomes a provincial enforcement tool that can be used. So it was about where smoking can occur and aligning it with alcohol consumption, because it is a recognized reasonable norm. And also in the cannabis bylaw, there's an opportunity for a special events coordinator to request a permit through the CAO if they bring a similar type of licensing agreement that AGLC provides for beer gardens. So it's not an out and out, sorry, your place, your back deck, in your basement, wherever you're doing it right now. We're looking to the future and looking to be as flexible as the government is allowing us to be flexible within my reason. And I defer back to the speaker for Fire and Flower. A lot of this was based on good bylaws that someone else has done and my personal opinion.
Okay, and I certainly appreciate you addressing that. I guess one thing I would ask you to keep in mind is, so there's obviously kind of and it's even mentioned in here, just the fact that there's a medical exemption. And obviously there's no medical exemption for drinking alcohol in public. And I think there's a reason why there's a medical exemption for public consumption of cannabis. And it's because it again is not the same level of intoxication. And so if it's not unsafe for a medical user to use cannabis, walking down the sidewalk, I don't think it's necessarily unsafe for somebody else who just doesn't have a prescription to be walking down a sidewalk and consuming the exact same thing. So that's what, again, it should be kept in mind that it's not in kind of the same realm of intoxication.
And I don't disagree with you, Councillor, for sure. The rabbit holes that appeared as I was going through this were immense. I was glad it wasn't a minefield, but there were so many things. This makes sense, right? And then it was, well, but they can start growing it now, and what's that going to look like, and how's that going to have an effect? Will it be a different effect than where you go and you purchase cannabis, or you choose the THC or the CBD? Thank you, Councillor. There's just so much unknown that we're going to have to grow and evolve through. And so with that unknown or that uncertainty, I felt that it was better to align it to something that looked and felt more, I hate to use the word controlled, but more similar to a public way of being when it comes to enjoyment of something recreationally. And that, I have no other, no other reason for going down that path.
Okay, like I said, I can appreciate where you're coming from on, and it is I understand it's a very complex, issue, like between, like the vaping, the smoking, the edibles, everything all combined. It's a very kind of complex and multifaceted issue. And I guess like part of me just, I hate the idea of, like creating a bunch of bylaws, then we're gonna have, because we're gonna have to enforce those bylaws. And I wanna make sure that we have bylaws that are worth enforcing and that have kind of a good reason for enforcing them, and.
For sure.
So that's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery.
And I'd like to go back to that because everyone is anticipating that the spike in complaints is going to go way up, just like beekeeping. Sorry, it's not that. Neighbors wanting to fight with neighbors, right? And, I'm growing plants because I'm permitted to grow 4 per person of 18 years of age or older, and I don't like that, and I don't, like there's going to be a lot of complaints over the next 2 or 3 years while society starts, Canadian society starts to get used to this, and yeah, I mean, it's even more, the companies that are working with it now can't cross borders, and it's really, it's going to be a journey for all of us over the next period of time. And I felt it was important that at least we had a starting off point, and definitely know either the province or this council will be revisiting this bylaw definitely before the end of your term.
Thank you. Mr. Thackeray and then Councillor Sobel.
Thank you. Just to support Trent, I guess we're still working our way through this bylaw, the smoking bylaw. There's probably further amendments to come, because we keep, like, we just found more, like the parks thing. So there'll be likely more changes that you'll see next time coming forward. And also, I think a good point and that Trent's been talking about is from staff and administration, we would recommend council take a fairly tight approach to the bylaw at first, because it's easier to loosen it up later, but it's very difficult to go the other way. And that was a lesson learned from Washington State and Colorado. I think they regret making some of the decisions that they made just as a strategy. So it is one right answer. There are other right answers, and this is really uncharted territory. Tracy, you want to? No? Okay. So there will be more things, and we will have to bring an amendment bylaw forward to address some duplication and some clarity. So, and Trent and Tracy are working on it. So we just
Tracy, did you want to add?
I just wanted to add a comment about the smoking and the limitations on public spaces, and one of the big reasons communities are going this way to limiting smoking in parks, pathways, parking lots, more in-depth regulations than the provincial act is around the philosophy of a healthy community and a place where children or people with medical conditions and asthma or seniors can safely enter facilities and walk through their community without being affected by smoke, be it tobacco or cannabis. And so if you look at it kind of from that really high level of a philosophy for your community, taking a harder stand on smoking helps you create a healthier, safer space for your residents. And I know that doesn't really tie into the enforcement and the legalese, but from a holistic approach, that's one of the reasons to kind of go this direction.
Thank you.
Which I know you like so much.
Thank you.
The
Council.
holistic.
I was going to say we should ban sugar as a community as well.
Absolutely.
Councillor Sobel.
I appreciate your comments there, Tracy, and that's actually the road I was going to go down, and I think it's a legitimate road to go down. I think we have to be concerned about our public, and although I see the difference, and I see your point in regards to comparing alcohol to cannabis, they each have their demons attached to them, and for cannabis, the demon is odor. It's a pungent, very strong odor of cannabis use, and it's offensive to a lot of people. Not everybody, but our polls indicate that it's a substantial amount of people. So I'm very impressed with this work. I know you've suffered through this. I know you've had a hard time with it, but I like it.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump back to the smoking because there is one piece that I do want you to recognize, and that is smoking under smoking. It's 3.3. Now, this was in the Okotoks bylaw. It's in quite a few. I just need your feel and your opinion on this one piece for sure. Easily enforced, but it will feel very invasive when we start doing that enforcement.
Councillor Cox and then Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not quite on that yet, but I do like your bylaw. I am confused about Jason saying that we can walk down the street with cannabis if we have a medical certificate, because it says we can't.
If you have a medical exemption, I believe you can consume it.
No, it still says that it goes by the smoking bylaw, which says that you can't do it anywhere in public.
You can't.
So even though you do have your medical license, you still can't do it in public.
Well, and that's one of the public messages that
Well,
needs to be
that's not
clear, is
exactly
that this
true.
is not a new freedom.
No,
This is it is a new freedom, but it's a new right, but not a new freedom. For the people that have medical marijuana as a prescription, they will still continue to do it the way that they've always done it, but there's a little bit more latitude now.
Councillor Peterson.
So just for clarity, so both of them are right. So just having medical marijuana license, card carrying doesn't make you exempt from municipal governance. However, schools throughout Alberta are facing a very unique situation because students who have been prescribed medical marijuana, smoking medical marijuana, and there are many throughout our province, schools are obliged to find a place for students to smoke. We believe the same thing will be happening in our seniors' lodges. And so, as you talked about rabbit holes and evolution, hopefully they don't become minefields. But, so Councillor Montgomery is correct. In some places, they're definitely, not only do they have the right to do it, there's an obligation on the part of agency to provide it.
A charter right, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Councillor Cox, did you want to carry on?
sorry, no, I do agree. But back to Jason's, you can't walk down the street smoking cannabis. Even if you had.
Designated for your use.
Right, but not walking down the street's not gonna be designated. So it still follows the smoking bylaw, that's all I'm saying. Does that make sense? No?
I appreciate the education.
You don't agree?
So,
If you're right, you're right. I think I'm going by just kind of like, say, anecdotes where people, various organizations have been forced to allow people to consume cannabis, on their property or in proximity because of the fact that they have a charter right to consume medication where it might be prevented otherwise, so.
And sometimes it's on the street.
That does happen, so.
Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Your Worship. 3.3, is that not the law, though?
it is.
So why do we need it in both?
Wonderful and excellent question.
Just a question, yeah, I'm not disagreeing, obviously.
If it's,
That'd be like making sure that people wear seatbelts, kind of, sort of. That was my point of it, anyway.
yep, I think you're correct, Councillor. I think you're correct, Councillor. But as long as it doesn't create as long as it's not stated so that it's ultra-virus to the provincial statute, you can restate it.
If I could, this just allows a bylaw officer to lay a ticket.
They can't anyway?
Not a bylaw officer, they have no provincial legislate
Right.
ability, so, or peace officers can.
I'm not
a
against it
bylaw.
anyways, by all means, but.
And without a smoking bylaw in town, something that people were previously used to, that was a deep dive. So the remainder of the smoking bylaw, the only other point that I'd like to make is 6. And that is with regard to odors. And this is how it interconnects with the cannabis. So we can enforce through this or intervene, which is what I'm afraid we're gonna be doing a lot of initially. But we'll have an option for people neighbors to have conversations, hopefully over the fence, and sort this out, or we have conversations with them and we sort it out. But odors was something that pulls the two together.
Councillor Cox?
Sorry, Your Worship, I got sidetracked. My comment was that, originally, was that I like your bylaw because I do believe you heard from our survey what people wanted and you implemented it. So thank you.
Councillor Montgomery, thank you. Councillor Cox?
So I have a question about vaping, and that is that, so I see here, it says that you can't burn, heat, or vaporize, that'd be number X, I guess. Vaporize tobacco, cannabis, or any other plant material. I guess I just have an issue with preventing vaping because from what I understand, people can get vaping liquids that are nothing more than just flavored liquid, basically. And so how are we going to, are we gonna be going and confiscating people's vape stuff and then testing it to see if there's any, and are we preventing, like it says you can't vaporize tobacco, but can you vaporize nicotine, like, cause some of those have nicotine, some of them don't. So are we gonna be, sending that off to a lab to test and then charging people and to do with like vaping, like, so I guess, what do you think about that?
So my thinking there, because I did know, I do recognize that there are flavored liquids that I guess the students and kids and I guess everyone that does that. So that's why I like this part, and because it's narrow, it's to tobacco. What the heck do I say? So it's X on smoking. And it's X, which is smoke or smoking. And third line, it talks about vaporizing tobacco, cannabis, or any other plant material. So I left the flavored liquids and stuff like that because I'm assuming that they have a sweet or. So you wouldn't know whether it's tobacco or.
So for instance, sorry, Your Worship, am I permitted?
Yeah,
So
sure.
we have students, and if you look at the marketing campaigns, it's really the best place to show where it is. If you look at the newest level of marketing, like Juul, Juul, is the one that's very, very popular with young people today. And they are using this to vape. It has, young people report to me that this is a non-tobacco substance, a liquid substance, that has 3 times the amount of nicotine as a cigarette inside the substance, is what you're speaking about. There would be no way for me to know, there's no smell other than the peppermint or the strawberry of the actual liquid vape, but it is shot with nicotine, so.
Well, and do we have a problem with, we don't want them vaporizing tobacco, but do we care if they're vaporizing nicotine? Like, is that the problem, or is it just the tobacco itself?
I think it's.
I don't want to vape, I don't want.
A lot of this bylaw is a lot of this is complaint based. So it'll be, if something's offensive, odorous in some way that isn't, you know, especially in a public area or a park or something like that. That will be the big driving force until this gets sorted out more.
And I think you're right. One of the conferences I went to said that you could, a wise approach would be to focus on the smoking aspect, to deal with that as your umbrella, because it applies to tobacco as well as other products that they could be using in their vape apparatuses.
So like, would somebody be able to vape in public? Like one of those liquids that Councillor Peterson, could I go to a park and vape, you know, like some sort of like a peppermint liquid essentially, and is that gonna be a problem?
It does say in your cannabis bylaw, it defines vaping as inhaling or exhaling any emissions. So then basically it's saying, wherever you can't vape, you can't vape.
Can't vape, can't
So you
smoke.
can't vape. No matter what it is, you can't vape.
I feel like this is like kind of too overreaching, to be honest. And I guess like the problem for me is, and we've seen this, you know, like kind of through a history of prohibition, but if you don't give people an outlet and a reasonably accessible outlet, you're gonna kind of push them into some sort of behavior you don't want, you know, whether it's like a speakeasy or it's, you know, people, yeah, you know, like maybe smoking in the house with their kids or something like that, right? Like, you know, we say you can't go out on the sidewalk and smoke a cigarette, you know, so they're gonna be smoking in their house with their kid, you know, and there's a lot of, and I'm the first one here, you know, to say, yeah, let's be a healthy community. But I also recognize that, like I said, you can only kind of suppress things so much before it kind of comes out somewhere else. And there's a lot of, and I personally feel this is overreaching. Like, you know, we can't, you know, like reasonably limit people's freedom to just, you know, like inhale, you know, some sort of aerosol and then, you know, expel that aerosol. Yeah, like, I don't know, it seems overreaching to me, to be honest, so.
Councillor Sobel.
Thank you. So two things. First of all, you made a comment in regards to this is going to be mostly complaint-based, and I appreciate that, but it's also doing something else. And the point I want to make on this is that you know, as a citizen, I have rights too. I have the right not to smell this stuff if I don't want to. And I think there's a lot of people that are in that same category. And you know, when you sit in your house or in a bar and have a glass of wine, you're not affecting me. But when you sit somewhere and smoke and I have to smell that as I'm walking through, that does affect me. And it affects my grandkids, and it affects my children, and it affects a lot of people. And my choice is I don't want to do that. I don't want to smell that. So, you know, I appreciate that they need their rights to smoke, but I need my rights not to smoke. And we are not saying you can't smoke. This bylaw only deals with where you can smoke. And it's restrictive. Yes, it is. And that's the price we pay for being a healthy, respectful society. But the question I did have for you was in what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, was in regards to odor, Trent.
Yes, sir.
6.1 nuisance odor, which is defined, and I'll just make a very quick comment that I'm concerned about that definition, only because we have to define, somebody has to define what's offensive and excessive.
Cologne, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what, it's just, you talk about a possible rabbit hole or a slippery slope, that's gonna be one. So, I'm not saying that we should get rid of that, but I just want you as in charge of your division to know that you're gonna be dealing with this section.
No question.
In the future.
Yeah, I understood, and not the reason why the generality is there, but part of conversation with a young firefighter who's just started with the department, who's a hemp farmer just outside of town. He said, no, the plants stink. Like, they stink bad. And so there's no restriction for where we can plant our 4 plants. So it could be in the backyard, and if there's 4 people living in the house, that's, 16 plants. And if they give off an odor that's offensive to your lawful right of enjoyment in your yard, then that's a decision that an enforcement officer is going to have to make, and it's not going to be an easy one. And that, I'm glad you brought that up, Councillor, because the last place I was going to stop on this journey was Schedule A, where it talks about offensive odors in the schedule. And yeah, it's putting a reasonable burden on the effective decision-making of enforcement officers to be adjudicators and peacemakers, but also some ability to say, no, that I can smell that from the front yard. You got to do something different here.
Councillor Montgomery.
I just wanted to say, like, I actually agree with your point, Councillor Sobel, about not wanting to smell various smokes. I think that's a good point and reasonable. And I always fall on the side of, I hope that people would, be, I guess, good, courteous members of the public and not expose people to that stuff. And I guess, like, so, I have less of a problem, I guess, with prescribing, smoke as opposed to other, like I said, vaping is, I think it's a totally different kind of animal as far as odors. Like, you can get vaping liquids that don't even have an odor. And so I think that it's not quite the same thing as kind of tobacco or cannabis. Some people actually apparently use vaping as a way to quit cigarettes, and I would hate to just in, like, for the sake of kind of clumping a bunch of things together that seem similar but aren't. I don't think we should necessarily group vaping in with that same kind of classification, especially when it comes to nuisance odors or problem odors.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to go to your nuisance odor thing, I have a couple questions. So the way you came up with these first offense, second offense, third offense on the schedules,
Yes.
my brain goes to, and this is not the nicest smell, but there are many, and there are many people that I'm sure complain about someone's yard and their dogs and the excrement. And come the spring, it's very nasty, very horrible. Is there a fine for that?
Under the
Unsightly.
no, it's the animal. I'm trying to think of the original name because I've been working on the new name. So, but it's under the animal control bylaw.
And there is a nuisance odor offense as well?
Correct.
Are they similar?
The fees?
Yeah,
I would have to check that. Thank you.
that'd be my comparison.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
I'm working on that bylaw, so they will be.
So, Mr. West, did you have anything else that you're bringing forward for us to specifically look at?
Not in the smoking bylaw, Your Worship. I would like to move on to the cannabis bylaw if I could quickly. I know that I'm consuming a bunch of your time. In the cannabis bylaw, of course, I've spoke with Ty and Carla in communications about not a promo, but a education program, much similar to the bins, where they did that 1 minute snappy presentation. And so around education information, a lot of the information that Fire and Flower probably would be producing as well. So there is an education and information campaign that we would be initiating with this. In this bylaw, I would like to refer you to K, which talks about violation tickets. Now, that's something that is new. Violation tags, I'm sorry, not tickets, tags. What it does is it gives an opportunity for all of the municipal enforcement to issue a tag. And if you pay it, which means that you've acknowledged that you did something wrong, but you pay that tag, it's usually 20 or 25% less than the actual violation ticket. Okay? So this is something new, and I want to draw your attention to that because it might be something that I would be asking council to consider in other bylaws that I would be bringing, such as the responsible animal care.
So the fact that it's quite a bit lower, that would be a part of the education part?
20 or 25%, they acknowledge that they were doing something that was in contravention, and they pay it beforehand, and they pay it directly to the town, as opposed to a provincial ticket, where they have to take time off work and go to court and deal with the ticket.
Okay, thank you.
So that is something new, a new element that I would like council to consider. And violation tags are the one element in this bylaw that it would be a difference from the other bylaws that I've presented or that have been brought to council from municipal enforcement. The rest were boilerplate that pretty much was taken from Thank You Okotoks. And I am, just let me check my last page here. I am ready to answer any questions with regard to this bylaw proposal.
Thank you. Any questions from councilors regarding the cannabis bylaw that's coming? Councilor Montgomery.
Sorry, and this is just, I guess, because I hadn't kind of read this part when Councillor Cox mentioned it, but, so are we actually preventing vaping of non-cannabis and non-tobacco with either of these bylaws?
So in the cannabis bylaw, as Councillor Cox indicated, through the chair to Councillor Montgomery, this definition does definitely indicate that vaping would be prevented, just like, yeah.
But like, we're talking about cannabis though, right? It mentions cannabis as opposed to just, like some glycol or something like that.
Yeah, and the way that it's worded right now, no, it's everything. Yeah, I would need to line up that definition in the cannabis bylaw with the definition in the smoking one, for sure. Because this definition definitely prohibits it.
Like, we're talking about the, like,
So under
section
the
J or
definition,
whatever?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
J, correct. And that's easy. I'll make sure that both definitions, I'm surprised that they aren't matched. It would be matched up in this one too. I would refer vaping, and I would say, just like I did up in public places and smoking, reference the smoking bylaw is exactly what I would do, instead of going with this definition.
Sorry, so we are looking to prevent vaping of non-cannabis and non-tobacco materials?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, this says it is, but this is in error, and that was a good catch by council.
Like, I read this part as just saying, just from cannabis, it has to contain cannabis or be
Yeah.
from cannabis. That's how I interpret it.
Unfortunately, that correlation for me is only because it's in the cannabis bylaw,
Okay.
but I don't think it's clear enough.
Okay.
And so I'm just gonna, in here, reference the smoking bylaw for that definition.
Okay, thank you.
But this smoking allows for non-tobacco vaping?
It does, yeah. This, in the smoking bylaw, it only talks about tobacco, cannabis, and plant matter, plant material.
Right, plant material.
Yeah. So again, offensive smells that would be a complaint-based versus the
Of course, we
flavor
can't,
liquids.
of course, we can't tell.
Apparently, I didn't know that, but yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. So we'll be having this come forward on October 17th.
Thanks a lot for answering all my questions, Trent.
You're welcome, Counselor.
Thank you. And that brings us to item 6.3, pathway development. Mr. Roycroft.
Thank you, Your Worship. I won't spend a lot of time on this today. Mostly just want to update council on pathways, especially around the Edgefield School, what we're looking to accomplish there, and then kind of how we want to start addressing pathway development at a more general level in town, a more systemic level. So right now, we have sort of a map for pathway development that's almost a bit of a wish list. But there's no, and I've included that, but there's no timing mechanism, funding mechanism, that sort of stuff. A plan without a date is a wish, as we sort of say. And a lot of the pathways shown on that are tied to development. So especially some of the ones, again, in Edgefield, around Strathmore Lakes, West Creek. And a lot of these developments are moving at, paces with the current economy that are a lot slower, I think, than what the public wants to see these parks developed as. I'll cite the example of Strathmore Lakes, of course, that the town ended up putting in the gravel last year. Despite it being a developer-driven project, it's just development was so long coming that ultimately the public really wanted this. So we have a wish list. Some of it's driven by others and no real timing or schedule or funding mechanism associated with it. Most specifically, I think we see that, wow, this didn't come near as well as I'd hoped, regarding around the Edgefield area with the new school. My apologies, this really did not come as clear as I wanted. Where council last week raised the question regarding going from that new Edgefield road down to Park Lane, and then as well coming on the east side of the road, south down George Freeman all the way to the co-op. So both of these are kind of really key linkages that we've seen come up with the school that I think the public really wants. So the path from Edgefield to Park Lane is, of course, in the plan without timing, without a mechanism. The park on the other side of the road, from Edgefield down to the co-op, is developer-driven. So the way the town, or the way staff are sort of proposing to address this is the Park Lane path, so from Edgefield to Park Lane, is a great priority to have, assuming council agrees, because it kind of gets a continuous stretch all the way along the east side of, or along the west side of the highway of George Freeman, wow, all the way down. So that's a tricky design. So it's not, because that ditch is unfortunately higher than the properties in Aspen, really, really super happy about that. It ends up being a tricky design, so it's not one that it's not one that I can in good conscience recommend that we do this year quickly and cheaply. It's one that staff are going to want to do a proper design on so that we can address the drainage. That just because that ditch is so much higher than Aspen, if we do this wrong, all the water is going to flow right back into those backyards. So that would be a spring 2019 project, the high priority pathway for spring 2019, out of the trails budget. That's, the town does set aside money for paths and trails every year, so that would be that. With regards to Edgefield south to the co-op, that is tied to a developer. It's a late phase. However, recognizing that this year it's kids are using it. Staff would propose initially for the winter that we talk to the property owner and just see if he'll be okay with just having our works clear a clear path through the snow along that property down to the co-op, so at least students aren't walking in the ditch. And then from there,
Yeah, they're walking on the road.
yeah, walking in the road. So if there were a safe path cleared there, at least the kids with more of a sense of self-preservation would be walking along that. And then going forward, looking to negotiate to acquire those lands early and put the path in. That will be subject to negotiations with the developer, but it's one that we can get to work on as well. So obviously the snow clearing would be looking to do that as part of our annual snow clearing. Acquisition and putting in the proper path would again be a 2019 subject to budget availability. It's not ideal, it's trying to sort of solve some of these problems, but staff think this is the right way to solve both of these challenges. As well, then going forward, start to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past and maybe making whole brand new kinds of mistakes. As part of this MDP review, we direct staff to put together a sort of a full-fledged pathways plan with, sequencing, timing, priorities list. Obviously, that would be subject to council approval, but we'll begin to put a framework around how we're doing paths rather than just responding to complaints and hoping we have the budget to do it. And try to be more systemic. It also gives council the ability to answer questions of the public when someone, again, comes to you wondering, when am I getting the path in this neighborhood? We'd have a rough date. So that would be a winter project tied to the MDP review that the planning team's doing. And the idea there would be, it would, again, get us more of a structure around pathways, and as grant funding and stuff comes available, we could move projects up. So that's sort of how staff is proposing we deal with both the George Freeman pathways this year, and then going forward, pathways in Strathmore in general. I don't want to belabor it, that's...
Thank you, Ryan. Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you, Worship. So this wasn't my idea, but one of my fellow councillors mentioned that, and I think it's probably a good idea to tie this into something like pathway development, but we should probably, especially with like certain capital expenditures, be looking at like kind of what the cost of maintenance will be and replacement, years out, because it's easy to approve, we'll extend this path, but like, it's like, how much is that going to cost, to maintain? How much is it going to cost to replace, in 5 or 10 years or whatever? So I think we should keep that in mind, and maybe even like make that something of a policy to include that in budget talks. Just like the maintenance and long-term cost of these.
Your Worship, in response to Councillor Montgomery's comments, and I will try to keep this very brief because this is my passion, is this kind of building your asset management funding into your initial budgeting decision. So one of the values of the municipal maintenance software, municipal management software council approved this summer, probably the third phase of that project, because it is, some people think it's the least exciting, is this idea of actually beginning to assign values to all of our linear assets.
Yeah.
Come up with, sort of their expected lifespan and be a lot more systemic in terms of how we're funding replacement of these. And I think over the next probably 2 years, we'll be talking to council a lot about this notion of an infrastructure deficit and how to address that and being more systemic about that. So absolutely, that's top of my mind, and it's one that we're starting to build into our work programs.
And tied into that Councillor Montgomery mentioned, when you have a situation like Strathmore Lake, where I believe the developer did put in part of the path around the lake, we need to ensure that if they do something like that they do it at the standards that we're doing our public pathways too. Because otherwise, they put one in, and if it has to be maintained or replaced sooner, that affects our asset management.
Your Worship, absolutely, and this probably falls to my second most favorite thing to talk about, is one of the priorities that we've set for the infrastructure team over the next year is beginning to build what I'll call servicing standards for the town. It's roads, it's pathways, it is establishing those base standards and then building them into our development agreements. So council
Yeah.
will recall that, probably last year around this time, wow, time flies, is we,
November.
council approved new templates for all our development agreements and all our subdivision agreements, and to avoid some of the other mistakes of the past where these things were really shortly written without details, without timing. And the next step to that then is to begin to build a robust servicing standards bylaw where we establish what is the right path length for Strathmore, what is the thickness of the asphalt, what are the drainage standards, all those things that are so easy to forget, but that they end up biting us in the backside when they aren't built into these documents, because what I consider a great path may be vastly different than what the developer who we're expecting to pay for it
Yeah.
considers a great path.
Thank you. That's good, Ryan. Councillor Peterson.
So near and dear to my heart, and one of the things that, in addition to what Councillor Montgomery and Fuel are speaking of with regards to putting that upkeep into the framework, and in terms of improving our linear asset process, one of the things that I like to look at, and I know it's a bit of a pipe dream at this point in time, but in terms of our stormwater management, which is always something that I go on about and make everybody else go to sleep, is that some of the really creative happenings that are occurring in communities around stormwater management in among flatlanders particularly, is that they are building swales through their pathway development, and it's shown to improve pathway competency into the future and improves the linear asset management around them too. Something that I'd like to look at, but I know that's probably a discussion for another day.
But absolutely, Your Worship, with regards to that swales and that sort of, I hesitate to call it innovative because our ancestors knew that one worked. That was always the traditional
Yeah, the
way,
Dutch
and
have
then
been
we
doing it since about
moved to
1700,
pipelines.
yeah.
But it's been my experience, even some of the big American companies, when we worked with Lowe's on one project, they insisted on
Swales,
putting these in.
yes, yeah.
They were 20 years advanced of where the municipality I was with at the time was in sort of this innovative stormwater management, because it was cheaper for them and it was better.
Yeah, it'd be a really effective way, an efficient way to
Yeah.
fix something that's not so efficient. Now, and my final thing is with regards to, I love your solution, in terms of the town assisting with the pathway, clearing a path to the co-op, but I think it's useful to have a conversation with the school and 3 teachers, for whatever fortune or misfortune that may be, sit on this council and kind of understand the nature of young people, and so when I talked to the people initially about watching the traffic that's going between the co-op and George Freeman School, particularly, of course, from the junior high kids, it's happening at the noon hour primarily, and so one of the most simple ways to look after that is to have the school simply make a different arrangement, which will be much easier now that the gym is in, but make a different arrangement until a proper and safe pathway is put in place. And perhaps that's a conversation we could have. And Tracy probably has already had it, by the sounds of it.
Conversations we've already had, and the principal has indicated he can make some changes.
That's my understanding too, yeah. So maybe putting a pathway in is not something that they would particularly like.
Yeah, that may be the case, Your Worship. Yeah, we'll follow up with the principal there, just to make sure.
Thank you. And thank you for that, Councillor Peterson. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Sobel.
So, well, I've now changed my question because it has to do with that. But I don't want to, I think it's a big mistake for us to be focusing solely on those noon kids that walk back and forth. I know that's an issue, but I also know that's a solution. But that's a north-south pathway that we've been looking for years and years I don't want people walking on that side of the road or biking on that side of the road. So I'm very anxious to see the pathway that you're talking about, and I appreciate it's going to be dirt, but it's still, I think, is as long as it's kept clean. I think this is a really amazing safety issue that we're implementing, and if we can do it with the developers' agreement, You know, we had a lot of success with Ron Reno on the west side in regards to doing one of these pathways on his land. So I'm hoping that we can continue on with that. But if just on that pathway, the one from the lights on the east side, the lights to the end of the school or to the roadway, that's already happening. Is that correct?
Your worship, on the east side from the school down to Edgefield, it is, won't point fingers here.
I don't want to point fingers.
There's been the town has worked hard to accommodate the school and the school's construction schedule on this, and we've not wanted our pathway construction to interrupt sort of what's been happening there. Mr. Thackeray and I actually went out to talk to the contractor ourselves on Friday about this because there'd been some communication issues, I think, between the contractor and the school board in terms of when the pathway could start, and weather permitting, I feel like I say that a lot this time of year, the school board and the contractor have given us the go-ahead to start putting that path in. So if the weather does improve later this month, which Environment Canada says it will, obviously everything's subject to that, but we could get that pathway in.
Great.
Yeah, it was a matter of, we would have liked to have put that in right away, but we need that school finished.
Yeah,
Couldn't
appreciate it.
interrupt that construction, so.
No, I get that. I've seen some things in the last month of people, and there was a woman with a carriage walking along a stroller, north on the side of the roadway. I mean, there's just enough room for that carriage in that thing. It scares me. It scares me.
Baby strollers on the back.
Yeah, so
It is scary.
if we have an opportunity to do that, I hope council supports this because I think I really believe that this will save lives or can save lives.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. Councillor Peterson.
So, Your Worship, in light of that, as far as the school kids going, I don't want them to go. Their parents should tell them to stay put, and their principal should tell them to stay put, but that doesn't solve the problem, and I understand that. But is there a creative way in 2019 or sooner to incentivize the developer around this? And I don't ask for an answer at this point, but just if there was, it would be good.
Yeah, you know what, Your Worship, I won't say it can be done, I won't say it can't be done. I think we need to have a good fulsome discussion with the developer. The developer may be happy if the town takes, how we solved some solutions with another project is the town simply conducted the survey work ourselves and did all the hard work to register the plans and everything. And it, essentially we took the land that the developer was ultimately going to give to the town off their hands. We did all the work. The developer got rid of a liability. So there are ways we can move this forward. Ultimately, it will depend on the willingness of the property owner to participate, but there are discussions we can have, and I think if we go into it with the right tone and the right attitude, good things can happen. So it's a discussion that we'll keep having and we'll keep updating council on.
Thank you. My only question is, and maybe this is something to Mr. Thackeray too, when we start to look at the pathway development plan into the future as far as prioritizing and deciding which ones should be higher on the list or lower on the list, is that something that will come in our visioning session that's coming up later? Or is that, when do we decide that? When will we be deciding that?
Your Worship, my vision of this is that it would sort of be a separate item. We'd probably allow the municipal development plan process and all the consultation that comes out of that to get going first, because we're doing a ton of consultation.
And that's fine if if you guys are going to do that, work on it, bring it to us. My only other question tied into that is, do we ever look at pathways that could be a real amenity for the town as far as marketing our town into the future? For example, we've always kicked around the idea of the fact that Strathmore is one of the few towns in Alberta that has an irrigation canal that flows all the way through it. So having a situation or a town that can say, we have X amount of kilometers paved kilometers of the canal, the irrigation canal that flows through town. Is that something that you would consider too?
Absolutely, Your Worship. Probably the single high point of my personal career has been my involvement in a large trail in the Okanagan running from Vernon to Kelowna. Pathways are are a great marketing tool because they appeal to everyone from sort of, seniors in the mobility, I'm not going to say impaired, but seniors and the folks whose mobility aren't great, through to guys like me who do, the big Grand Fondo cycling races. Pathways are a great asset, and even as I get, I've recently moved to Strathmore even, having access to some of the pathway networks, especially in the older neighborhoods, is great, and it's a great selling feature, and so it's absolutely one we can use to promote the community and just generally make the town a better place to live.
Thank you for that. So we'll look forward to hearing from you in the not-too-distant future. And anything else, Council?
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you very much. That brings us to 6.4, Council Committee Governance Policy, found on page 23. And this is Jen Sawatsky.
Thank you, Your Worship. My item isn't as exciting as bees or cannabis, but we'll try and get through it. So, as part of Council's strategic planning document, Council identified the need to review their committees, and in particular their process for appointing committee members and establishing council committees. So administration did a review of council's policy 1101 to see what kind of changes we could make, and we decided that we could change the whole thing. So in your package, we have a policy 1101. The new policy that we're presenting to you, and this is totally up for council's discussion, that's why it's here. The new policy sets out classifications of all of council's committees. It establishes a nominations committee who will hear and decide on nominations for public members and make recommendations to council. It also establishes a clear process and qualifications of members, clear process for the qualifications of public members, which are to be identified in the committee terms of reference. And it also establishes requirements for the terms of reference. The classification of the committees, as I said, are defined in the policy, and you'll see that in the Schedule A of the policy. All of the committees that council currently sits on or has established have been categorized in that schedule. It makes recommendations also in that schedule of what committees council should be appointed to. And I want to mention that while the policy does propose in advisory committees that council members do not sit on advisory committees, there are kind of two sides to that. Council can bring a lot of knowledge and direction to advisory committees, but on the other hand, an advisory committee's role is to give council advice from the public to council. So it could be perceived as at odds to the interests of providing that advice. So just something to be aware of there. Another change that we're recommending is establishing a new type of committee, which would be a focus group. And a focus group, they can be established to conduct research and provide expertise in developing and improving either town facilities or services. And they're really beneficial because they can really expedite matters, and specific timelines can be set to focus groups, and council can get quicker results with them. It also provides focus to the committee so that it's a very defined purpose for them. As I said earlier, the policy does establish a more robust application and review process, and that's done through the nominations committee. So there is a bit of a process to that. It's clearly defined in the policy. It also defines what legislative services role will be in supporting council's committees as well as the nominations committee. And I am open for questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my question just had to do with like the chair, and like, because it says the chair would be like kind of part of picking people. So basically, it's like you like I found a lot of times we're picking the chair, you know, like at the first meeting or something like that. Or so how's that going to work as far as
Yeah, carryover? thank you. I'm sorry, I completely forgot about the chair process. So the thought behind the appointment of chair would be that council would hold 2 advertising campaigns. The first would be for the chair of a committee, and then that chair would be appointed, and then they would participate in the second campaign, which would be for public members of that committee. Now, it all depends on what the terms of reference for each committee sets out, because as council does right now, you can still identify members from different groups in the community, such as the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, but those public members would be the ones that would go through that nomination process. And it's important to note, because there has been discussion amongst council about qualifications, and do we want to set out qualifications that we require from public members. We've kind of left that open where council can, in the terms of reference, decide whether or not they want members of that committee or a focus group or whichever to have qualifications and what those can be. So council has complete control of what they want required from their public members. And that could be nothing at all. But the tool is there for council to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Councillor Sobel?
Thank you. I know how much you've worked hard on this, Jen. I know this was not an easy task, so, and I think you did a great job on it. I'm really am impressed. As you probably suspected and just alluded to, I'm torn in regards to the advisory committee. I think to get around, I'm not so sure that I'm prepared to suggest that council stop going to advisory committees. And there's a number of reasons why I think we should be at those meetings, if nothing more to provide some guidance and some, I was going to say wisdom, but that wouldn't be a good word. Direction, that's a good one. And some support. I think more support than anything. But I really would, if council decides that is something that we are that's worth pursuing, then I'd really like to remove us from the ability to vote in those committees. And I think that would remove us from the or mitigate that issue that you're worried about. I don't think I've never felt comfortable in voting on those, and I just don't think we should be voting in advisory committees.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. Councillor Peterson, did you have anything? Oh, okay. So Ms. Sawatsky, do you know when this might be coming to us as far as policy consideration?
Yes, Your Worship. So this will be coming next week to your council meeting. Another recommendation that administration will be making next week is that council extend all current appointments on committees for a month so that we can get this process in place prior to new appointments.
Councillor Peterson?
I just have a question for clarification, Your Worship. When Councillor Sobel brings up this whole idea of committees specific to advisory committees or focus group committees or I forget what the other one was, like the Strathmore Overnight Shelter, those ones, about voting. We had some sage advice a year ago. I've had a year to think about it from Mr. Rycroft, Senior, and I've had a long time to think about that. And I know that this isn't the place where it would come up, but it's something that is sort of considered within this. And I don't know if we should be talking about it at the same time or if it's a time for in the planning documents, but it impacts it. But I don't have any solution or proposal.
Yeah, I know that is one of council's concerns is voting on external committees. It definitely can be included in part of this policy. However, I think that needs more discussion amongst council, not particularly with this, in passing this policy, but perhaps more of a professional opinion on that matter.
Thank you. Mr. Thackeray?
Could I suggest maybe that we bring it up on the 24th?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
If that's okay, because I think it's a valid discussion, and I think it's, as we mentioned before, there are other larger jurisdictions that are going back because of the inherent issue, liability, and I think it's worth, it's merited some discussion. We don't want to.
Your worship, when Mr. Roycroft approached this when we had our meeting at the Days Inn, he asked us to put it into consideration in the context of our actions with regards to our role as a councillor in a town versus our commitment to the public and it was lots of wisdom in that, and certainly I have a different view today than I did a year ago. And I just want to say for the record that for me, this was the most exciting part of the meeting. And Councillor Montgomery probably wants to make a motion, Your Worship.
Well, actually, we have to come out of the camera, then I can make my motions.
Why don't we go to Councillor Sobel, and then we'll come back to you for, come out of.
I'm just, very, very quickly, those external meeting, I'm tossed on the external ones. I guess perhaps some legal advice, but I'm not so, like, for instance, the first external committee is Calgary Regional, Metropolitan Regional, but we have to vote on that. You know, so, but certainly on the advisory, and the problem I have with the advisory ones is it takes that councillor out of voting one way at the committee as a committee member, and then perhaps voting a different way on council and with the council hat on. So that's the problem I have with that.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. I think that's it for that. Jennifer, thank you again on behalf of council for all the work you put into this. And Councillor Montgomery?
I will move that we come out of committee of the whole.
You've all heard that motion to come out of committee of the whole. All in favor?
I will further move that we, I wish that we will extend the meeting till 10:30.
I don't want to wish. What did you say?
I'm just, I'm.
Yeah, that's right. So we have the motion from Councillor Montgomery. We have the motion from Councillor Montgomery to extend the meeting to 10:30 if necessary. All in favor?
I stole that from Councillor.
I thought you were referencing Ryan.
Oh,
You know,
no.
he said, you know, a direction without a plan is a wish. I thought
Oh,
that's
no,
what you were
no,
doing.
no, a couple meetings ago, Councillor Cox wished a motion instead of moving it, and I just thought that was really nice.
Councillor Montgomery?
Wish you wouldn't have done that. I'd like to know.
I'm probably going to wish that too, actually. I'll move that we dive right back into committee of the whole.
Okay, we've all heard the motion. All in favor? And we're back in committee of the whole. Item 6.5, organizational structure on page 41.
Thank you. What you have before you is a proposal.
Sorry, he just has to step up for a second.
Is a proposed change to the org structure, which would include creating a new department. Strategic and administrative services. The intention of this department would be to help the leadership team and also help council by focusing more resources and creating some internal alignments, particularly with a focus on innovation and systems improvement, aligning legislative services, archives, human resources to support internal services, and as well as helping me in my role to support council with resources on some pretty important projects around strategic planning and special initiatives. Thank you, council, for your support over this past while. And the proposal also is inclusive of moving economic development because he currently resides with Ryan's department, but we feel, and we've talked about this at the staff level, all the directors looked at this proposal. We feel that the alignment of marketing and communications and economic development is a logical for it, and we believe
Thank you for that, Mr. Thackeray. Councillor Sobel?
Very quickly, I love org charts, but they mean very little to me without a name attached to them. Is it possible to get, I'm just wondering about, like, medium administration positions and up on an org chart or in some fashion? Just because I gotta tell you, James, things have moved so much in the, I have no idea who's who anymore, or what department they're with.
I can answer that. We are working on actually populating an org chart.
Great.
Because the departments want to make some adjustments. So we are just in the transition with our, if I could speak in closed session about our transition, what we're doing, because I can update council on some changes there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from council?
Next week is coming up.
Sorry, I was just looking back just to see if you were bringing it up further at a later date, and I don't see that, so it's fine, it's okay. Item 6.6, administrative inquiry responses. Ms. Sawatsky, is that you?
Your worship, I'm sorry, there are no administrative inquiry responses this evening.
Thank you.
Question, Your Worship.
Councillor Sobel.
So this delicate thing, I know, but I got to bring it up because it's, I've got two here sitting here over 3 months old, and I really would like to close these files. One was July 4th. It's a street naming issue at Aged Care, and I know it's a complex issue, but even if I could get just an update. I do have a complainant on this matter, that's why, and I keep sending her messages saying nothing heard, but.
Oh, sorry, Your Worship, I can answer that. Chris in our GIS group has been working with liaising between operations and the complainant just to come up with a solution.
Okay.
So it is active. We'll make sure it gets dealt with pretty quick. I think
Thank you.
it's gone dormant. Chris has been away for a while, but
Okay.
we'll make sure, there has been conversation, and we'll make sure that gets dealt with.
Thanks. Second one was also July 4th, and that was in regards to citizens on patrol and whether or not administration could provide information that pertains to the current status of this program and what, if any, plans to exist to resurrect or revitalize it. As long as nobody looks at me, I'm okay.
Can we get back to you on that?
Oh, sure.
Please?
I was hoping that would happen. Yep.
We'll get back to you.
All right, and the last one I have is more current one, but it was September 19th, and it's, and that's in regards to the lights on the bridge, and my note here is Ryan will deal with this and come back with costs. And that's still happening. Thank you.
Your Worship, I've been given, sorry to respond to an old item, Mr. Justin, should know your last name by now. Just informed me the signs have actually been.
Mr.
Yeah, there you go. The signs to solve that issue are actually on order, so Chris is further ahead than I thought.
I'm sorry,
With
on which one?
regards to the,
On the
the
street.
street name.
Oh, you're kidding? Oh,
Yeah, so Chris is further ahead than I thought on that.
so can you tell me what's happening?
Signs have been ordered.
Yeah, but what signs? I don't understand that.
The signs will be directing them to their address, so we're gonna put it on 2 sides of the intersection.
So we're not changing the name of the street?
No, we're just pointing them towards their address.
Okay. All right. But there is a street there already.
Just pulling up
It's
some
on
notes
Sagewood
that we
Gate.
got.
See, they live on Sagewood Gate, but they can't use Sagewood Gate as an address because Sagewood won't let them.
Sorry, I'm just trying to.
Yep, no, that's okay. You know what? Let's leave it. You can get back to me.
Yeah, Your Worship, I think we can safely say that we're moving forward on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make sure it's the right solution.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
Your Worship, do we have an update on going to Workshop Studios?
Your Worship, with regards to that, I was kind of waiting to get the tourism committee appointed before we did that. And I just have to talk to Ms. Swatsky now about how we'll do that. We have the names queued up, it's just a matter of how we fit it into the new structure, but that was kind of gonna be my first event with them in council as a.
Perfect. Gotcha. Good plan.
Thank you for that, Councillor Peterson and Ryan again. That brings us any urgent business, I don't believe. And Mr. Thacker, just a question to you. Did you need to discuss that item regarding personnel in camera? Okay, so we need to come out of in camera, come out of committee of the whole. Councillor Peterson has a motion to come out of committee of the whole. You've all heard the motion, all in favor? And Councillor Corbeil?
Go in camera.
And a motion to go in camera from Councillor Corbeil, all in favor? And we're going in camera at 9:35.